Today, we are diving into one of the toughest foreign policy puzzles out there. It's a question a lot of countries are wrestling with, but for a key U.S. ally like Australia, the stakes are incredibly high. How do you navigate a world stuck between a rising, powerful China and, an increasingly unpredictable United States? It's a high-wire act with no safety net.
And at the very heart of this problem in Australia, you've got this really deep and, as one top analyst put it, increasingly nasty divide. This isn't just some polite debate in a university hall. We're talking about a genuine battleground of ideas, with two hostile camps so entrenched that finding any common ground seems almost impossible. So, what is this great dilemma exactly? Well, you can think of it as a fundamental clash between two completely different visions for the future. It's a showdown that pits old, historic alliances against new, powerful economic realities.
So let's break down these two hostile camps. On one side, you have the China hawks. Their argument is pretty straightforward. Australia has to stand firm with the United States to protect the world order that served them so well. But on the other side, you've got the U.S. declinists. They look at the world and see American power fading, and they argue that Australia has absolutely no choice but to learn to live in a region that's increasingly dominated by China.
Okay, so to really get what's at stake here, we have to ask the big question. Is American power in Asia really fading? Or is the truth a little more complicated than that?
At first glance, you look at these numbers and wow, the U.S. still massively outspends China on its military. It's not even close. But, and this is a huge but, raw spending doesn't tell you the whole story. The real question isn't just about how much money you have, it's about where and how effectively you can actually use that power.
And this brings me to a brilliant concept from way back in the Cold War, from a strategist named Dean Acheson. He talked about creating situations of strength. The idea is simple but powerful. You don't try to be strong everywhere all the time. Instead, you focus your power in key strategic spots to become so overwhelming that your rival wouldn't even think about starting a fight there.
And you can still see this strategy working perfectly in some parts of Asia today. I mean, look at Japan, look at South Korea. The combination of American troops and incredibly powerful local allies creates a classic situation of strength. The combined U.S. and Japanese naval power in the East China Sea, for example, is a huge deterrent for Beijing.
But then you look elsewhere, and the whole picture just flips. In places like the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, the tables are completely turned. China's right there, on its own turf, and its massive investment in advanced anti-ship missiles, what some people call carrier killers, creates dangerous situations of weakness for America. Trying to intervene there now would be a whole different and much bloodier ballgame for the U.S. military.
So you've got this messy picture, strength in some places, weakness in others. And faced with a shifting balance of power, Australia has made a massive, historic, and frankly, incredibly risky choice.
And that choice is the AUKUS Security Pact. Now, this isn't just another boring treaty. We are talking about a profound shift. Australia is set to get its hands on nuclear-powered submarines. It's going to host rotations of American bombers that can carry nuclear weapons, and its military bases are getting woven more and more tightly into America's war plans. This is Australia going all in on the American alliance.
So, of course, the second you tie yourself that closely to the American war machine, a huge question just pops up. By trying to get safer under the American umbrella, has Australia accidentally painted a giant target on its own back?
And the blunt answer is yeah, absolutely. You have to look at this from Beijing's perspective. American bombers flying out of northern Australia can hit China's nuclear missile silos. American and Australian submarines operating out of Perth can hunt China's own nuclear subs, which are their last line of defense. So in a crisis, this gives China a massive incentive to hit those Australian bases and hit them first.
And here's the crazy part. Just as Australia is doubling down, betting the farm on its dependency on the United States, the reliability of its protector is more in question than it has ever been.
And of course, we're talking about the possibility of a second Trump presidency. This introduces a whole new level of uncertainty. I mean, when he was asked about defending Taiwan, a cornerstone of American policy for decades, his response was basically, "Why are we doing this?" He questions the very foundations of the alliances that Australia is now betting its entire future on.
You know, his philosophy here isn't that complicated. America first sees the world in terms of deals. Alliances aren't partnerships built on shared values, they're protection rackets. Allies are basically clients, and if he thinks they're freeloading or the deal isn't good enough for America, he is more than ready to just walk away. So what you've got is this glaring contradiction. On one hand, the AUKUS Pact is being sold as this ironclad, multi-generational partnership.
And on the other hand, you have a potential U.S. president who looks at those kinds of commitments and sees a bad deal for America. He offers zero guarantees.
And here's the real kicker. It's written right there in the fine print of the deal itself. The U.S. law that makes AUKUS possible explicitly allows a future president to block the sale of the submarines to Australia if they decide it would weaken America's own Navy. And given the U.S. Navy's own submarine shortages, that's not some fantasy scenario under a Trump presidency. That's a very real possibility.
So you add all this up, this shifting balance of power, this huge strategic bet with AUKUS, and a protector who might not show up, and it puts Australia in an unprecedented, and let's be honest, a truly perilous position.
You know, this quote from analyst Emma Shortis is pretty blunt, but it just cuts right to the heart of the whole thing. Using the language of Trump world, she says all this anxiety boils down to one question. How do we make sure Daddy stays? It really forces you to ask whether this whole strategy of dependence is fundamentally flawed.
Just let that sink in for a second. This is the central paradox of Australia's entire strategy. Through AUKUS, it has made itself more dependent on the United States at the exact moment the United States has become its most unpredictable. The risk has been cranked up on both sides of the equation.
Which leaves us with this final massive question. If doubling down on the old path of dependency is a losing bet, then what does a new path for Australia even look like? Does it mean more self-reliance, building up its own strength? Does it mean getting much closer to its neighbors in Southeast Asia and the Pacific? Or is it some delicate diplomatic dance that no one has quite figured out how to master yet? That is the challenge that's going to define the next chapter, not just for Australia, but for this entire part of the world.